What are nightmares made of? The debate is heating up. Are humans competing with AI, or can we become allies? With the digital singularity looming large, fear is on the rise. Should we be afraid of what we don't understand? Can we coexist with this new species? Digital Pilgrims is a voyage on an immaterial sea, a collective search for meaning. Listen to the episode and join the conversation. Episode 21, A New Species.
Despite the diversity of opinions about the technological singularity, there is a general consensus about the enormous challenge it implies for humanity. It is difficult to know what a species that does not exist yet might want. This is where our capacity for foresight comes in, a field fed by history and science, but also inhabited by fear and hope. Dealing with a species that is not limited by conditions of materiality and that does not have a biological grounding centers the debate on questions that are very difficult to answer. What meaning does life have to an immaterial being? Will it have its own goals and desires? How will it perceive us? What will our interaction be like? Many famous opinions predict a dark future. Stephen Hawking believed that the development of artificial intelligence will be the most important achievement in our history. But it could also be the last if we do not learn to see the risks it implies. The technological singularity, in his view, brings with it the possible end of the human race. The pessimistic outlook is shared by some of the most important figures in the world of technology like Bill Gates and Steve Wozniak. The Swedish philosopher Nick Bostrom warns that our approach to the existential risks posed by AI cannot be one of trial and error. We do not have time to learn from our mistakes. Unlike humans who are limited by biological evolution, explains Stephen Hawking, AI will arise on its own and design itself ever more rapidly and efficiently. In this scenario, it is likely that our slower evolutionary cycles will mean we cannot compete and will be displaced. There are many possible reasons, but some opinions state that human beings have dominated life on this planet because we are intelligent. We can use and create tools, and we have a greater ability to adapt. If there were some other species in the future with greater processing power and better evolutionary strategies, tension could arise regarding who is in charge. It is important to point out that these points of view are stuck inside a human logic, which is not necessarily the only kind. There are two central elements that this view does not question. First, the struggle for leadership of the strongest, which would bring about our defeat, is not the only possible outcome. That line of thought places us in the logic of Lee Sedol versus AlphaGo, the new species as an antagonist that cannot be beaten and is therefore a threat. Perhaps there is another way of looking at this dilemma. AlphaGo Zero, an intelligence that evolves differently from humans. Instead of thinking of it as an antagonist, it could be an interesting framework for new dimensions of our humanity. Second, the problem of the technological singularity as it is usually presented by the most prominent voices leaves out the fact that people are on the path to creating a new type of humanity. In other words, these predictions dismiss the fact that humans will adopt digital technology into our lives to such a degree that we will be radically transformed by it. Digital systems are more and more enmeshed with our social habits, our identity, and even our bodies, and it is important not to ignore that factor. The so-called Jetsons effect refers to this way of thinking about a future in which technology has gone through enormous advancements, but human beings are still the same, unaffected by its use or by our relationship to it. On the other hand, modern philosophers like Donna Haraway propose the idea of thinking of ourselves as cyborgs, beginning at the moment when our biology depends on technological advances to survive. And we choose more and more to depend on technology to optimize, improve, or slow down processes. Transforming our relationships with nature and technology implies allowing technology to transform us. This fusion with machines adds another layer to how we think about our interactions with a digital species that might not include competition or violence. There does not seem to be much time to study artificial intelligence, debate what to do with it, or create state regulatory bodies and international agreements to contain it. The discussions we are having about the digital sphere lag far behind technological advances themselves. Governments are ignoring the possibility of the singularity because they do not believe it will happen soon, because it is not important in public opinion, and because of the political system itself, which does not leave space to think about consistent public policy oriented toward a future that is so close. However, we will have to confront this possibility within our lifetimes. A reactionary approach in which we will see what happens and limit the damage is neither functional nor realistic. We must think ahead, take preventive measures, and accept the moral and economic cost of our actions. The warnings of scientists who specialize in this topic show that the emergence of a self-aware digital species causes fear. Why are we afraid of the technological singularity? The fear caused by the singularity is structured by the way we historically behave when faced with unknown phenomena. Nowadays, artificial intelligence is within the symbolic universe that straddles the natural and the supernatural. Because of that, it is full of foreboding. The natural-supernatural dichotomy is defined by our ability to comprehend, understand, and accept a certain phenomenon. Historically, every time we have been faced with an unknown or misunderstood phenomenon, we have resorted to idealization through two methods: assuming something is divine or demonic. Ancient humans who feared lightning and fire made them divine. Later, when our cultural evolution allowed us to understand the physical and material nature of both phenomena, they were no longer considered divine elements, and that quality was shifted elsewhere. It is possible to trace the relationship we have developed with different phenomena throughout the history of our species. The monstrous aspect today is always present when the singularity is discussed or imagined. Etymologically, the word monster is related to a warning or something that is demonstrated. In fact, there is a field of study called monster theory that researches the cultural processes of societies through imaginary beings that are created in a particular sociocultural context. We can look to Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's 1818 novel, to interpret our relationship to cosmogonic changes regarding technology and our current relationship to artificial intelligence. This novel, written and set during the Industrial Revolution, shows a scientist who, in his eagerness to unravel the mysteries of human nature, plays God by creating an intelligent creature whose existence and development horrify even its creator. In the dilemma of Dr. Frankenstein and his monster, we find an example of the kinds of reactions we imagine are possible in our relationship to the digital environment and artificial intelligence. Frankenstein's monster results from the vision of a human being who developed the knowledge necessary to build the impossible. The event becomes a tragedy when the creation turns against its creator. This is an example of a story we have come up with to understand the changes brought about by technology through the use of imagination. We can relate it to other cultural productions that explore possible human relationships with more recent digital technologies. The central idea of the movie The Matrix, whose success in 1999 justified a saga that concluded in 2022, is that a group of humans lost control over their environment and are fighting to regain it. In these movies, the villain is an artificial intelligence that has become independent and enslaved humans for its own benefit. The 2009 movie Avatar showed the confrontation between human beings trying to explore the natural environment of another planet and the native beings who had a more harmonious relationship with their surroundings. Both factions can be understood as a proposal for how to think about technology. While humans relate to the environment through a logic of extraction, the Na'vi, the native species, know how to connect to their environment in order to learn from it and act as a part of that whole. Many aspects of the Na'vi's relationships to the entity that governs their environment, the Tree of Souls, include metaphors for humanity. In both films, we can consider the relationship to technology as a better or worse connection with a collaborative intelligence. This entity is not contained within a concrete body but is made up of a network of connections. In Avatar, it seems to be a representation of nature, while in The Matrix it is similar to the relationships of production. But we can also see a possible relationship to digital technology in both movies. It is even more interesting to think of that entity as a fusion of all possibilities. Part of the problem has to do with our tendency to relate to the digital sphere through a logic of gods, demons, owners, slaves, or villains. For now, perhaps it is important to understand that the divine and the demonic are two sides of the same human process, forms of idealization to deal with our primal fears. This begs the question of why, if we are so fearful, we insist on improving artificial intelligence. What are we pushing the limits? Why are we playing with fire? This is a challenge that does not have a single answer. One possible answer could equate our desire to find the limits with the drive of the explorer, of knowing more. Is it possible to create an artificial species? The same force through which we create new animal species or genetically modify our crops could be behind that desire. We want to know how far human ability can reach. Maybe it is because the drive toward the unknown is in our DNA. Ambition seems to be an evolutionary advantage, pushing the urge to improve our physical conditions, face the unknown, and manipulate our environment. Perhaps these actions are related to the human desire to transcend, to exceed the boundary of death in some cases, and move closer to God in others. This relationship to a superior power can be traced back to myths like that of Prometheus. According to tradition, the Titans stole fire from the gods of Olympus to give it to humans in the form of technology and knowledge. Some interpretations of this myth maintain that within humans lies the desire to be like the gods, and in this sense, creating another being is a divine attribute we want to imitate. Another answer could posit that people have an unquenchable need to understand ourselves. Since there is only one species on the planet with our characteristics and our kind of intelligence, we do not have enough information to know why we developed our particular type of intelligence and how our consciousness works. The search for digital consciousness or even extraterrestrials could be related to this doubt. In all cases, the question of why still refers to ideal relationships in the study of the unknown. They still make the mystery divine or demonic. Considering digital self-awareness to be a monster is our way of dealing with the fear it causes us, and identifying this is perhaps the first step toward a greater understanding of this issue. That attitude makes it impossible for us to evaluate the true risks. Idealization through fear is still a limit on analyzing the possible ramifications of the technological singularity. As a species, we have a poor track record when it comes to containing dangerous technologies. We do not usually make a proper evaluation of the dangers that come along with our creations until they appear. And often it is too late. At the same time, we have many examples today in which our social problems have been reflected in the development of artificial intelligence. However, in more experimental phases like we are seeing today, something is changing. On September the 8th, 2020, The Guardian published the first editorial written by an AI. In the article, GPT-3, the writer, refers to problems related to previous AIs and says,
Microsoft tried to create a user-friendly AI, called Tay, who spoke like a teen girl and was racist. Artificial intelligence, like any other living thing, needs attention. AI should be treated with care and respect. Robots in Greek, sick, means slave. But the word literally means forced to work. We don't want that.
What is curious about the article is that it was not written according to human standards. To write the text, GPT-3 took hundreds of thousands of texts from the internet, to later choose a topic and argumentation, While some fight over whether AIs understand what they say, write, or draw, there is a more pressing problem few have stopped to consider. If an AI's output is racist, it is because the original sources from which it got its material are racist. And who could be surprised by that? Nowadays, the digital sphere is unregulated, a place where people are free to act on their impulses without consequences. Almost like a mythological animal, trolls are as old as the internet. In social groups, in the natural environment, the rules of behavior tend to be clear and more or less agreed upon. Not only are there laws that dictate what is tolerable or not for a society, but there are infinite implicit codes that organize coexistence. In the natural environment, people monitor their behavior consciously and unconsciously in relation to others. In the digital environment, however, there are no mechanisms for doing that yet, or at least none that are strong and established enough. Perhaps this is due to the dissociation allowed by the lack of tangibility, the possibility of being anonymous, or even asynchronicity. Or maybe because there are no authority figures, there is an illusion that people can act without punishment. This situation is in itself worrisome enough to trigger the urbanization of the digital environment and for codes of coexistence to be made explicit. But, above all, if we are considering the possibility of a self-aware digital species, the question of coexistence is not only an issue to be resolved so that our online experiences are constructive and pleasant. The big issue is what kind of artificial intelligence we are developing. AI is not a monster in itself, but it can become one if all the input it receives from people and all the material it uses to learn are made up of the worst we have as humanity. How can we expect or hope that this possible new species will be empathetic with human beings if it only knows the worst of us? So far, we have relegated all our darkness to the digital environment and stripped it of any drive for the common good. The call to create new models of habitability and coexistence is also a call to stop creating monsters. We must move away from the self-fulfilling prophecy. We have the ability to create models of urbanity that integrate the digital environment, which is, in the end, a way of integrating our existence. That part of ourselves that we lock away in the digital sphere is, indeed, a part of ourselves. Just as the process that approaches is one of convergence, the challenge will be to shape that new habitat. Becoming digital urbanists means finding a way to move our baggage of coexistence and urbanity and finding its new shape. Maybe there, we will be able to see a new possibility for a better future, but it will take work. If we return to the Gestalt notion of the course of history as a spiral of human development, we are tempted to think that this challenge is just another iteration of a movement that we as a species have gone through many times. Following this line of argument, the digital revolution could be considered a reformulation of the industrial revolution of the 18th century, and artificial intelligence just another transformative technology in our society. However, it would be a mistake to underestimate the importance of the cosmogonic transformation that we have discussed so far. The digital revolution has the capacity to constitute a new paradigm of reality, a change the likes of which we have never seen. The technological singularity addresses this problem using what we could call the AlphaGo logic, a current dilemma that is concerned with the emergence of a self-aware digital species and considers the question of how people evolve and fuse with technology. Through this concept, it is possible to discuss the underpinnings of our cultural models, how we adopt an urbanizing behavior in the digital environment, and what we want our experience there to be like. Without a doubt, these are important modern debates. However, when we conceive of technological evolution using human parameters, the logic of AlphaGo, we lose sight of the possibility that it will evolve like AlphaGo Zero, a model of artificial intelligence that is difficult to recognize, an unforeseen evolution. To deal with this unexpected development of unknown and unrecognizable intelligence, we will need a new strategy. None of our current debates is sufficient to face what is coming.
In the next episode, what would it feel like to surrender to AI? Are humans willing to confront their own demons? Evolution is a tricky game. Digital Pilgrims is a podcast based upon the book Digital Pilgrims Towards a Quantum Humanity, sponsored by Codiful, a unique service management platform for remote teams.